This is the new McLaren GT, and I've been driving it around the south of France all day, had a brilliant time. We filmed a full feature for Carfection, it's up on the channel now. If you haven't watched that yet, you can watch it now, or stick around for this, where we answer the questions that you asked us on Instagram, where you can follow us at Carfection Films, where we asked you what you wanted to know about this car, and you gave us a lot of questions. So we're going to answer the best ones. Why does this car even exist? Just get a 720S. Well, that's partially not a question, but why does this car exist? Well, for starters, it's a lot cheaper than a 720S. This comes in at about £165,000, so around 570S money. Someone appreciating the car there. So then, why would you not just get a 570S? Well, they are very, very different cars. You can look at the obvious things. This has a lot more boot space. We've got all of our kit, all of our shooting gear, plus overnight bags in this car with room to spare. That's worth pointing out. Huge tripod bag here, big camera bag in the front, my bag, everything is in this car, and there is still room for way more in the back. 570S couldn't do that. But also it drives completely differently. It's not a track monster. I would take a 570S to the track, I would not take this to the track. So it is just a different car. What about its V8? Well, I guess you're wondering how it's different, maybe? The question's not clear, but it is a 4-litre twin-turbo V8, which sounds very familiar. McLaren uses that engine already, but it has been lowered, it's got a new manifold, it has new pistons, it has new smaller turbos, and it's been mapped differently. So although it comes from the same block, McLaren call this an all-new engine. It delivers torque earlier and flatter, more consistently across the range, and it does feel different. How comfortable is the ride? Well, it's not like a big wallowy old-fashioned American Cadillac where it wallows around. It's not as smooth as a Magic Carpet ride like you'd get a Rolls Royce. That was a big bump just there to prove it. It is more compliant than you would expect from a McLaren, but it is firm. It is firm for a GT car in that it gives you the responsiveness of the road. You feel the road beneath you, but it's dampened enough to make it comfortable over long distances. It makes poor road surfaces feel like better road surfaces, but you still feel the bumps. We've been driving it all day and I'm perfectly comfortable. The seats are comfortable, my back doesn't hurt, so yes, quite comfortable. More so than a 720S, I might add. Is it a suitable car for crossing continents? Well, that is the whole point of a GT car. It wouldn't really be able to call itself a true GT car if it wasn't able to do that. And I'd say the combination of the luggage space that it really does have, and we've been putting that to the test today, its overall comfort and it's the fact that it's a nice place to be, yes, you could absolutely carve up a continent in this. Is it the most practical McLaren? Yes. I mean, it has more luggage space, so that immediately makes it way more practical. It is designed to be driven easily at slow speeds in urban environments. There's an honesty to this car. It knows where it's going to be driven. And yes, sometimes people will be using it crossing continents, but sometimes people are going to drive it to the golf club. And you can take this on a daily shop. It's probably the easiest McLaren to daily. Yeah, I would say so. Is it a better GT than the DBS? Well, better is a hard thing to say because the different price points, they have got different ethoses. The DBS is a very traditional front engine, rear wheel drive GT car. This is a different way of looking at it. I think it comes down to whether or not you've got brand allegiances. The DBS is obviously very Aston Martin and this is very McLaren. And if you have a preference either way, then that might skew it. Personally, I love Aston Martin, so I'd be hard pushed to consider McLaren for a GT car, but that's just based on preconceptions of what the brand is like. If you wanted a hybrid, you might be pushed towards Toyota because that's the feeling that you have towards that brand. Other companies do them, but that might be the first place you go. For an all-electric car, you might think of a Tesla. But for a GT car, I would think of Aston. So yeah, take that into account. Is it a better Grand Tourer than the 570 GT? Well, that's an interesting question, because the 570 GT was McLaren's, I guess, McLaren Automotive's first attempt at making a GT car within the lineup that they had at the time. It's the 570S with a bit of a backpack. It's a little bit more luggage space, slightly different mapped engine to give it a more GT-like quality. Is this better? Yes, because they took everything that customers liked about that car in terms of its GT-ness and then added all the things that they were saying that was missing. So yes, in fact, this is so much better a GT car than the 570 GT that in the grand scheme of things, the 570 GT is going to be a one-off blip on the radar for McLaren that will never to be repeated. We're not going to see GT variants of the Sport Series anymore. The 570 GT, once-off thing. There is now a whole different class just for Grand Tourers. And the 570 GT was a great car, and that inspired this car to be better. Sound isolation and sound system. You guys need to get better at formatting your questions. Sound isolation is very good. McLaren have really attacked this car with science, trying to figure out what sounds it wants to keep in, what sounds it wants to keep out. Because of the longer wheelbase of the car and the different orientation of the engine to give you that extra boot space, the exhaust note as a consequence has actually become very good. It's very low and rumbly, and they've done their best to keep that in. But the NVH has very much been limited. So it actually sounds great. Now the sound system is this Bowers and Wilkins system, which sounds great, has these huge woofers in the door and tweeters up here. Sounds really, really good. So you can get enough enjoyment out of the car's sound on its own, but it's also just as easy to blast out some tunes if you want to. Because the engine is under the luggage compartment, does it have heating issues like the Senna? So that is a huge concern, because the engine literally sits directly below where you would put your luggage, and obviously that engine runs incredibly hot. So in order to keep your luggage from basically boiling over, McLaren have put in very, very good heat insulation above the engine to keep as much of it as possible out. But they've also forced a lot of the hotter parts of the engine out to the side, so the exhausts all come out through the side, which is part of the reason why it feels so wide around the rear haunches and why those intakes are so large, because everything that needs cooling is right there in the side. So those side intakes are massive. They take up a huge chunk of our side mirrors here. Now because of that, the hotter parts are on the side. You can actually feel it when you open the lid. The outside on the side of the boot lid is very hot, but the inside the boot itself, McLaren says that they've been able to keep down the temperature to 40 degrees. Now you're not going to want to keep your ice cream in there, but it's still cooler than it could have been, considering the engine is just a couple of inches below it. So we would have to have it for a lot longer, but so far with all our luggage in the back, we haven't had any issues with it being that close to the engine. Good question though. How does the new infotainment system compare to past generations? It is improved. Is it still better than using your phone? No, but who does make an infotainment system that's better than using your own phone? Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, those are still far superior ways of using sat-nav and entertainment and music than anything built into a car. But this is better, it's faster, it's got a 10-core system, 10-core processor in there, which seems crazy to have that in a car. It's 5 times quicker than previous versions, so it is improved. Does a set of golf clubs fit in the boot? Yes, if it's a moderately sized golf bag. Will my golf bag fit in the boot? Maybe, at a push. Maybe. Can it carry 2 bags of charcoal briquettes back from B&Q? Well, considering how much luggage we've got in the back now, absolutely it can. Is it as comfortable as other GT cars? It has a level of comfort that I would be comfortable with calling a GT car. I have driven from Land's End to John O'Groats in a Continental GT, and I was fine at the end of it. Would I feel the same in this car? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure I would. We've just been passed by Continental GT, that's coincidental. It's on par, it's in the right ballpark. It can depend on your body shape and how you like to sit. This is a comfortable car. Is it more comfortable than the Conti GT, which is my go-to GT car? No. but it's a very different kind of car. You get more enjoyment out of the drive potentially than you could in that car. So it swings and roundabouts. Does it really bring new rules to the GT segment? That sounds like it was written by a McLaren PR. It provides us with a new way of looking at the GT car. I mean, to me, if you'd asked me before this car came out, what's the layout of a GT car? You go front engine, rear wheel drive, obviously. This is a mid-engine car. This has a supercar layout, mid-engined, rear wheel drive. You wouldn't have thought that that would lend itself to a GT car, which needs luggage capacity. But they've made it work. It's not as spacious as some other GT cars in terms of boot space, and it's definitely not a 2+2. But yeah, it does bring new rules. It does make people sit up and take notice. Now there's another competitor in that market for the likes of Bentley and Aston Martin. So in a way, yeah, it has brought new rules to the game. Which car is the most logical rival? For me, it sits between the Aston Martin DB11 AMR and the Continental GT. McLaren don't like to think of any car being a competitor, but I'd pick those two. So there you have it, answers to some of your questions about the car. They mainly boil down to how is it to drive? It's great, unlike any other McLaren, really great to drive and truly a GT car. And about the luggage, yes, you can get quite a lot in. We've actually been amazed how much we could get in this car with room to spare today. I am sacrificing rear visibility, but all our equipment has fit in today, and we could have brought 2 extra bags and still had room. So it's spacious in terms of luggage space. It performs as well as a GT, but it's also fun when you push it. And looks wise, well, people might be a bit split on that, but it is definitely unique. So watch the full review on the channel. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell icon to make sure you're up to date with everything that we do on Carfection. Follow us on Instagram at CarfectionFilm so you can ask questions about the next car that we're driving. Find us on Twitter at Carfection, and we'll see you next time.